So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to this presentation, which is all about how to think like a futurist. And it's about looking at, not that we can do a crystal ball gazing and know what's coming up in our future, because the future is quite uncertain. It's in fact the exact opposite of that. We can't see what's coming up in our future. So how do we lead given that this uncertainty, and how do we make well-informed decisions? So we've got about an hour together, and I want to share with you some of the ideas that I use when I work as a futurist with clients. This presentation is in conjunction with the Graduate Management Association of UWA, the University of Western Australia, where I went to uni many years ago. And so welcome to all the GMA members, but also I know there are as many people from other places as well around Australia, New Zealand, and a couple of people from other countries as well. And that's of course one of the benefits of doing this as an online presentation, is that we can reach out to the whole world. As many people here do know me, but for those who don't, I'm a business futurist. So I help people look at trends and also how to manage in an uncertain future. And it's this uncertain future idea that I want to explore today. I've worked with a lot of organizations in the last 8 to 10 years, and I'm just sharing some of these here, the organizations I've worked with at a leadership level. And I'm sharing this for a couple of reasons. So one is you can see they're big and small, there's government, non-government, there's Australian, multinational, everywhere. So it's across the board, but also we hear that a lot of people saying we're in unprecedented circumstances now. And, you know, that's true, but it's only true because it's happening to everybody at the same time. And over the last 7 or 8 years, I've worked with a number of clients who've also in their businesses and in their industries gone through massive disruption, massive change, and they've had to be able to cope with that as well. It's just different now because our pandemic is a global pandemic that's affecting everybody. So some of these strategies are things that I know work in specific industries, and of course they're going to work across all industries and all businesses. We've got a very diverse group here today. This morning I was delivering a similar presentation to people in the insurance industry, and I could be a little bit more specific, talking about the future of insurance. But many of the principles are the same, because it's actually, when you're looking at what I'm going to share with you, they are outside your business or industry. So we'll get to that. My rules of engagement with all my presentations. So first of all, I'd like you to think. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to think a little bit differently. Broaden your thinking a little bit in this session, because it's easier to think big now and then step it back when you get back into your workplace or your community or your organization, than to think small now and then try to expand your thinking when the rest of the world comes and hits you. So think big, but also be a bit playful. So there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. In fact, I'm not going to wait till the end of the presentation to ask questions. In the chat room, anytime you want to ask questions, type them in the chat room. So let's use the chat for questions. You can use Q&A as well. Keep an eye on Q&A, but I prefer that you put them in chat. And if you're asking questions in the chat, you'll notice that you can ask them to all panelists, which is just me, or all panelists and attendees. So ask your, please choose the option for all panelists and attendees so everybody sees your questions. The other reason for that is that I'll be asking you questions along the way as well. We'll be doing a few polls. There'll even be the opportunity for somebody to win a copy of my fabulous book, Disruption by Design, before we finish this hour together. So be a bit playful. Take part, engage, do the activities in this hour, because then you'll get the most value from this session. But the third thing is I really want you to get some actions that you can take away and put into practice. So it's not just theory and it's not just good ideas, but you're going to get some actions as well. All right, let's do a little bit of interaction. So first of all, in the chat room, what is this? Does anyone recognize it? Let's see how quickly we get the answer. I did this last week with a group, and okay, so Michael says you got my attention. What is it? Yeah, David, exactly right, Pong. Right, so this is what computer games looked like when I was growing up. This is my stepson, Josh. He's the one on the left. And you know what? Computer games have changed a lot since then. And this is what they look like now on his Xbox. And the thing is, there are a lot of people, especially leaders and especially experienced leaders, who are still Pong thinkers in an Xbox world. Now, it's not because we've become dumber with all our experience, it's actually because the world has changed around us. And as we're looking at the future, just be careful that the things that got you to now, where you are now, aren't necessarily the same things that are going to help you succeed in the future. And the more experienced you are, the more likely you are to fall into that trap. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about decision making, but I wanted to give you this overarching idea to get started with. Okay, another little bit of engagement here and another little bit of exercise. This is a bit of a puzzle. So this is a puzzle with 4 cards. Let me explain what the cards are because they're possibly not the kind you've seen before. So every card has a color on the back. So you can see a red and a yellow. And every card has a picture on the front. So you can see a fish and a dragon. And I've got a statement that I'm going to make here. And it's either true or false. And I'm not going to actually ask you whether the statement's true or false. But if the statement is that every red-backed card has a dragon on the front, is that true or false? And I'm actually not going to ask you to answer in the chat box. Don't answer whether it's true or false, because some of you will already have figured out that you haven't got enough information here to be able to tell me for sure whether it's true or false. You need to turn over some of the cards. Now, obviously, you could turn over all the cards and you know for sure, but you don't need to turn over all the cards. The real question I'm asking you is which cards must you turn over to be able to tell me for sure whether that statement's true or false without having to guess. So in the chat box, can you type in without, just in one line? So if you think it's all the cards, even though I've told you that's not the right answer, type in 1, 2, 3, 4. If you think it's 3 and 4, type in 3, 4. If you think it's, I can see a 1 only or a 2 only. If you think it's that, type that in and we'll see. Okay, so I can see lots of responses coming in. I think I've seen 1 correct answer. I've actually seen, I think now, 2 correct answers, and maybe some others have scrolled past as well. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so a range of answers, and let me share the correct answers and to see for bragging rights who got the answer first. So let me show you that there's 2 easy cards that you can make a decision on. So first of all, number 1's really easy. You need to turn it over to see whether there's a dragon on the back. The other easy one's number 3. You don't need to turn over number 3. It's get yellow back, so it doesn't matter what's on the other side, whether there's a dragon or not. The other one you don't need to turn over is number 4. And a lot of people have said 4, but actually, if you think about it, if it's got a red back, then it doesn't give you any extra information. And if it's got a yellow or a blue or a black or something, then it doesn't matter. It becomes irrelevant like 3. You do need to turn over number 2. Because if it's got a red back, then the statement's false. Okay, so the correct answer is 1 and 2. And I did see a couple of people got that. Ricky and I think David as well, and maybe some other people as well got that. So here's what happens. And I've done this with conference audiences in the hundreds of people in the room. And generally when I ask them to do the exercise and put up their hands if they got the right answer, even with hundreds of people in the room, only a handful of people get the right answer. And it's because of this. So most people get number 1, but they don't get number 2 because there's no red, there's no back, and there's no dragon. And if you're thinking about our futures, I reckon we've got 2 kinds of future, and they're a little bit like this. So one is future number 1, where you can see the future, and it may be challenging to get there, but at least you can see what's ahead and you can plan for it. The second kind is the future that you can't see. And that's where you have to be nimble and agile and flexible and be willing to plan for this future, but know that that future might change and the rug might be pulled out from under you at any point. So you need to be able to be willing to change if we need to. Okay, so we're looking at these 2 kinds of futures, and some people are really comfortable in that uncertain future. I've got a friend of mine who sees that uncertainty as an opportunity. We've got the 2 younger generations in the workforce, the Generation Z, who are like the young 20-year-olds, and the Gen Ys who are now in management roles. They want change. They want not necessarily uncertainty, but they're bored if things are the same. So they want things to keep changing. So it's not true that nobody likes change and nobody likes uncertainty, but a lot of people do find that challenging. In fact, let's run a poll around that. So I've got this poll for you here, and the way the poll works, so we're not going to use Zoom's polling, we're going to use this other polling system. You can either just type into a web browser window, t.ly/poll, or I've just pasted that link into the chat box for you. So you should be able to click the link and go to the poll. So let me just show you the poll window here as well. So you see the poll window here, and the way that it works is, so there's three ways to get to it. You can either type in t.ly/poll in a, not in the chat window, but in a web browser, in Safari or Chrome or something. You can click the link in the chat room, or if neither of those works, you can go to menti.com and you can use the code at the top there. Okay, and when you do that, you'll see that there's 4 questions that I'm asking you here. So you need to answer all 4 and then click the button at the bottom, and then your poll response gets registered. So you can see, as people are voting, you can see what the results are. So the 4 questions are, they're pretty self-explanatory, like do you operate on a scale of 1 to 5? Do you operate well when the future is certain, even if it's challenging? Again, do you operate well when the future is uncertain? And the same question, same 2 questions for your team. And it could be you, it could be your team as the team that you manage or the team that you're in. It could be the team that, if you're a business leader, it could be the whole organization. If you're a senior manager, you could be responsible for a fairly large team. Okay, and we'll see what people are saying with the poll questions here. So it's interesting, and I'll just tell you. Yeah, it's interesting. So I've run this poll a number of times with a number of groups in the last few months, especially. And there's something that's a little bit different with this group, which I'll share with you when we give people a chance to, a few more people a chance to vote. So I'll leave the poll open for another 10 seconds. So if you hadn't had the chance to vote yet, then here's your chance. Okay, good. So one of the things I found, comparing this to the last few months versus the last few years, when I've asked this question to groups, is that generally the numbers are lower. And I think that just reflects the fact that we've had this huge global pandemic that very few people predicted, not nobody, but very few people predicted. And so we've got kind of become a little bit more wary about even what the certain future could be. The other interesting thing I think with this group is that for those first 2 questions, the score is pretty similar. The people on average are saying, and what you're seeing here is an average, not a median, on average are saying that we're pretty similar in terms of managing a certain future versus managing an uncertain future. Typically, there's more of a gap, like we see in the 3rd and the 4th questions, that in a certain future, we're pretty comfortable. In an uncertain future, we're much less comfortable. So it's really good to see, even though the numbers I think broadly are lower than, say, this time last year, it's good to see that people are reasonably confident managing in an uncertain future. Okay, so I want to give you some strategies to be able to manage better when we've got this uncertainty. So thanks everyone for doing that poll. We've got another poll later. You can keep the poll window open and it'll switch automatically to the other poll when we get around to it. So I want to share with you 3 things here strategically and also some tactical things around that. So first of all, I want to show you how to scan wider. So think bigger than just your own business or your industry or even your day-to-day operations. I then want to show you how to, and I'm going to show you this process called scenario planning. And then in your plan, I want to give you one really practical thing that you can do to kind of strengthen your plan to manage for uncertainty. And then the third area is then how you act more decisively. So how do you make decisions? It's all work very well having this plan, but if you're too afraid to make a decision because that plan may fall over, then it's not a very useful plan. So I want to show you how to be more decisive. And again, I want to give you a really practical technique there. We're going to stop for questions along the way. So please, as we go along, I'm more than happy for you to type questions in the chat box and we'll come to them when I stop for questions. Don't hold them back to the end. That's my point. We hear a lot of people say that we're all in the same boat now, and I don't think that's true. It sounds true, but actually I think we're all in the same storm, but we all have to navigate our own boats through that storm, and every one of us individually is in our own little boat trying to navigate through this storm. So the thing that I'm saying for you today is everyone's plan and strategy is going to be different, and we'll see a little bit more of that when I talk about the crisis recovery growth curve. So when we're creating our plans, because of this uncertainty, don't aim for perfection. So when you go out and do your planning, whether it's a big strategic plan for the next 5 to 10 years, or whether it's your plan for the next 90 days, you're not trying to create the perfect plan. When the crisis hits, you might think, well, metaphorically, it's like a kid, like a plan is out the window now, and the best plan we've got is like a little kid's drawing, and you're not trying to create a masterpiece. You don't have to, you don't have to create a masterpiece. What you're trying to do is create something that's kind of in the middle. It's okay for now, but we've got a backup plan that we can move to. Okay, so that's this process in a nutshell, is how to create an okay plan, but make sure you've got a backup plan and a plan C as well that you can flip to and know when you can switch to that. Okay, so let's look at this first area, which is scanning wider, which is actually looking out into the environment. One of my favorite quotations from Tolkien, from The Hobbit, and he said that if you're doing your strategic planning and there's some live dragons out in your future, in the path, in the journey that you're about to take, it's a pretty good idea to incorporate them into your plans. Kind of paraphrased a bit, but that's kind of the gist of this idea here, right? So there are some live dragons, and there's some dragons that many people don't see because they don't scan wide. So this process of scenario planning is all about how to do wider planning. It's actually looking beyond what might be your day-to-day operations, or even what might be what you can see in your industry. The scenario planning process was invented by Shell in the 1970s. Senior management saw that there could be many different things happening in their future. So they got a group of guys together, literally 3 men, and put them in a room, and they said, do some research into what the future is going to look like and then tell us. So these 3 guys did they looked at multiple scenarios. So in the 1970s, they were looking at what happens if Jimmy Carter becomes president, what happens if the OPEC countries constrain the supply of oil, what happens if there's war in the Middle East. So they came up with all these scenarios. They figured out which are the most plausible ones. Then they took them to the senior management and the board, and they said, here are some scenarios. And management said, fantastic, which of these is going to happen? And they said, no, that's not the way this works. The way this works is we've given you multiple scenarios with some idea about plausibility of each. You have to then create a plan for which one you think is the most plausible scenario, and then other plans for if these other things happen. And so this process of scenario planning was born, and Shell still does this. And it's a process that we can now borrow and use ourselves. So this is like, I run half-day workshops with senior leadership teams on doing this. So we're not going to go into the whole process of scenario planning. If you want more details, obviously contact me and I'll help you. But I want to give you one tool that I use at the start, which is really useful. And it's a tool called PESTLE Analysis. So PESTLE is just an acronym. You might have done PESTLE Analysis before. You might have done something called STEEP analysis. So STEEP is also an acronym. It's just got 5 letters. PESTLE's got 6. So if somebody says to you, oh, we should do some STEEP analysis, just say, oh, no. Gihan said we should be doing PESTLE analysis. So much better. And actually, there's nothing magic about the word PESTLE. It's just an acronym that'll help guide us to just give us some ideas. And it's just looking at 6 different domains around in the environment that could affect us. So it's us as an individual, as a team, as an organization, as an industry. So PESTLE stands for, so we're going to actually do a PESTLE analysis exercise. Let me explain it to you. I'll give you one example and then we'll do the exercise. So PESTLE is the P's for political. So what things might change in politics what political things might happen that might change. So elections might happen, and you see some examples later. The first E, it doesn't really matter which order you do the E's. The first one's environmental, so climate change, sustainability, a coronavirus pandemic. So what sort of things could happen in the environment that could change our future? The next one, the S is for social or sociological. It's around people. So things like Generation Z coming into the workplace, an aging population, people connected all the time, people obeying the rules around level 4 restrictions in Victoria, people disobeying the rules and so on. So what are these social trends? Technological, which everyone seems to want to talk about. And when I do this with teams, I say, yeah, great, we should do that. But there's all these other things as well, because there's some cool technology out there. Make no mistake about it, but that shouldn't be the only thing you think about. Legal, what's happening with legal or regulations, with laws or regulations, what impact is that going to have? And the second E is economic. So in a recession, what's the impact of that? What happens if global GDP goes down by 3% in the next 2 years, which is quite possible, and there's a disaster. So what impact is that going to have on the world, on Australia, on our industry, on our business, and on us? Okay, so that's PESTLE analysis in a nutshell. We just go through those 6 areas, and then you look at potential scenarios, and then you put that into your planning. And let me give you an example. So let's pick environmental, because of course, coronavirus, COVID-19 is a hot topic at the moment. And let's look at what our strategy was in Australia early in the virus. So we saw what was happening in other parts of the world, in Wuhan, in Iran, in Italy, in the UK. And we said that our strategy in March and April is going to be to flatten the curve, to make sure that our health system is not going to be overwhelmed by the number of cases that we came in. And everything was built around that strategy. And Australia as a whole, and actually every state and territory, every jurisdiction has done a really good job of that. So even say Victoria, which is the one that's struggling the most at the moment, even then even they have been able to keep the curve flattened enough that it hasn't completely overwhelmed the healthcare system. So that's the strategy. But now when we're looking ahead, what are the potential future scenarios that we can consider? So I'll just give you a few of them. We could eradicate the virus, and that means get rid of it from the whole world. Unlikely, we've only done that with one virus in the past, which is smallpox. We could eliminate it locally, and eliminate means there's no mystery cases, and local is that we get to choose what local means. In Western Australia, we've eliminated the virus because we've had no mystery cases or no community transmission at all since April. Other parts of Australia have done the same. Queensland has had some cases and now eliminated again, and so on. But we could decide what local means. It could mean all of us, individual state, all of Australia. It could be a travel bubble with New Zealand and South Korea and Taiwan and other parts of the world which have eliminated it locally. So those are scenarios to consider. We could find a vaccine, and it's actually surprising how promising the vaccine research seems to be, looking at it, not only from the political spin, but actually looking at what's happening, because vaccines typically take 10 to 15 years to come to market. But of course, we've got the whole world working on it now. So we could find a vaccine, or we could find a treatment. So even without a vaccine, if you catch COVID-19, it may not be particularly as bad as it is now, or it just becomes, the virus mutates and becomes endemic. So it's in the community, it's like the seasonal flu, and we just need to cope with it. So those are some scenarios around this one particular environmental factor. So pick that one as an example. Let's do some other examples. So this is the chance for you to get in and do your own ideas around PESTLE analysis. So here's a different web page to go to. And when you go to this web page, which I'll also paste in the chat room for you here, when you go to this web page, what you'll find is that you'll see here, and I've kind of seeded this for you. I've got you started on this, but you can, and I'd like you to contribute to this as well. So let me open up this page for you. Okay, so when you go to this web page, which is this PESTLE analysis page, what you'll see here is these 6 columns. And in each of these columns, what I'd like you to do is have a look, and anyone that you want to add to the column. So the way you do it is you just click the little plus sign here. So actually, let's pick this one, legal. And then you get a title and the chance to write your idea. And in the title, put in your name. If you want to keep it anonymous, you can leave that blank, but you can put in your name. So I'll just give you a quick example. So let's say, so somebody called Clive is saying that hard border closures are bad. Okay, and that's it. So as people are adding ideas, they'll come in here. I've kept some of them, so you can see some of them. The first row are the ones that I put in there earlier, and the others are kept in from the session that I did this morning from the insurance group that I was speaking with. I took out the specific insurance specific ones, but I left some others here just to get you thinking, right? So let's have a look. So you can see here, so somebody this morning said Trump winning the US election again. Absolutely is a scenario that we should consider. Like it or not, it's something that we should consider. Yeah, global tensions, shift of international power. I think, yeah, if there was ever a time that we were going to have the Asian century, it's now. Which includes Australia in that kind of same time zone. Okay, let's see what people are saying. Okay, COVID vaccination, mandatory, or at least highly encouraged. Australia becoming protectionist, yeah, that could happen, and it could happen like there's a comment this morning about supply chains and less globalization of industry and manufacturing. And actually what people are doing in that example is that they are going to have their original supply chain, but all their customers want to know they've got backup supply chains as well. Protectionist was one. A massive attack by hackers, absolutely. So cybersecurity is a major issue. Yeah, working from home with less stress. People have learned how to work from home. Yeah, and there's a big issue, and it's not a technological issue. It is absolutely a social issue, it's both from managers and team viewpoints. So anyway, we could you get the idea of this, right? So you do your PESTLE analysis to get, and it's all you're doing is you're scanning wider. When people engage me to do scenario planning, what I do is I do the initial PESTLE analysis for them, because my day job is doing a whole bunch of research across different industries. So I help them think about things that they hadn't thought about before. So for example, in the insurance example, robotic process automation, Internet of Things for real-time measurement and tracking. So those are examples that somebody in an insurance company may not be thinking about, but they are things that are outside their initial thinking, but still within their industry. So when you do this PESTLE analysis, think about things in your industry as well, but also broader things that could affect your industry and your organization. Okay, so I hope you got the idea of this PESTLE analysis. It's a really powerful tool. And if you haven't done it before, it's really worth doing it, because, and you can do it by yourself, but it's better if you do it with a team, and just get them to kind of just do a brainstorming session around that. Okay, let me just stop for questions. So if you've got any questions, I didn't see any that had come in the chat box, but if you've got any, then type in questions. I'm going to leave the PESTLE analysis window open in the background, but let's see if there are any questions coming through. And if they're not, but you get if you think of an idea later and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that question earlier, that's okay. There'll be a couple of other opportunities for questions along the way, and don't feel that you've missed the opportunity to ask a question just because we haven't got to it yet. Because we're at a halfway point, which is perfect. Really good timing, actually. Okay, let's continue. So the next thing I want to do is look at this idea of doing your planning. And we're not going to do, obviously, we're not going to have the time to do a full plan, but I want to give you one practical thing that you can do with your planning that will help it make it a little bit sharper for uncertain times. And before we do that, let me just talk about what happens when a crisis hits. So you hear people talk about the U curve or the V curve or the W curve. This is like the simplified, the most simple version of it. Simplified, what happens when we have a crisis is people go through 3 stages. Crisis, when everything falls apart, kind of, and you're just scrambling to keep everything together. Then there's a recovery, which usually takes longer than the crisis itself. And then when we're kind of back to where things were, then you might start saying, okay, now we're in the growth phase. And the way that people do planning varies depending on which of these 3 stages you're in. When a crisis hits, everybody says we're just going to be reactive. Doesn't matter what our plan was, we put it aside, and we just kind of do everything that we can to just keep our heads above water. That's natural. Everybody does that. Then a good organization would start saying, after they're just coming out of crisis, would start looking at the short-term future and say, we can be responsive now. So we don't have to just react to things. We can be a little bit responsive, but it's still short-term thinking. It's like walking into fog. You might walk ahead a few steps because that's all you can see. And then you decide what to do next. That's okay. And then you say, oh, now that the crisis is over, now we'll start thinking proactively. So good organizations will do this. They'll start looking ahead. Better organizations, if you want to be a little bit ahead of the game, do this one thing differently. So just start being proactive, even when you're in recovery. And I've had a few clients in the last few months who've done exactly this. They've come to me and said, Gihan, we haven't fully recovered, but I want my senior leadership team to start thinking proactively about our 5-year plan, even though we're not back to baseline yet. So do that. That's one idea. The other thing is that some organizations, the most innovative ones, they're disruptive as well. So they say, COVID-19's come along and the pandemic has completely broken things and disrupted everything. Rather than like our pieces from the jigsaw puzzle have all fallen over on the ground now, instead of trying to put them back to create the same picture that we had before, why don't we use this as an opportunity to create a completely different landscape? So it's not necessarily disrupting your business or your industry. It may be just disrupting yourselves. And again, I've got clients who are saying, what should we do? Like if we're how can we use this? How can we turn this crisis into an opportunity? And for some people who are still going in crisis mode, it definitely doesn't look like an opportunity. And I get that. So if you're still in crisis, and there's some businesses and industries that still are, then it's not appropriate to say, how can we use this as an opportunity to be disruptive? Wait a little bit until you're out of crisis before you can start thinking that way. But I reckon you've got an idea about where you are. Are you reactive, responsive, proactive, or disruptive? And based on that, you're going to create a plan that's going to look at short-term, medium-term, long-term. So regardless of where you are in your planning process, I want to share with you an idea that will help you with the planning. And this idea, there's a great book by Dr. Heidi Grant Halverson. She's a social psychologist, and she and her colleagues have done a lot of research into, it's like goal setting, but goal setting for a fast changing world. And I've shared ideas from this book for literally the last 10 years, but especially now, some of the ideas are particularly relevant for a very fast changing world. So let me share one of them with you here. And so the researchers did this experiment where they looked at a group of women who were about to start a weight loss program. So they were all committed to losing weight. And so the researchers surveyed them at the start of the program before they started. And they asked them a number of questions. So one of them was, do you think that you'll be successful with this program? And some said yes, some said no. Another question they asked them was, do you think it'll be easy or do you think it'll be difficult? Again, some said easy, some said difficult. At the end of the program, they looked at the participants who succeeded, and then they went back to their original surveys and they had a look at what they answered for these two questions in particular. And I'm not even going to ask you in the poll because I reckon you'll know the answers. The successful people were the ones who said, yes, we think we're going to succeed, but it's not going to be a piece of cake, a walk in the park. It's going to be challenging. There's going to be obstacles along the way. And I think you know that, right? Like intuitively, we know that. If we think that everything's going to be really easy, the first obstacle that comes along is going to derail us and we go, oh, that's it. Forget about it. That plan was a bad plan anyway. So what the researchers say is you should be a realistic optimist. So be an optimist in the sense that you still should create like positive goals, long-term goals, stretch goals, be optimistic about that, but also realistic about the chances that things are going to get in the way. And I'm going to give you this really useful process for being a realistic optimist. It's kind of based on the idea of a medical post-mortem. So, post-mortem has when somebody dies, let's say a patient dies on the operating table, the surgeon and the team get together to figure out what went wrong so it's not going to happen again. So some Harvard researchers said, why don't we apply this in a business context and we'll invent this thing called a pre-mortem. And what they do in the pre-mortem is they say, what you do is you set your goal, you set your plan, and let's say it's a 12-month plan. It could be a 5-year plan. I've done this with a client, a local council, who said they wanted to set a 15-year plan. But whatever time frame you set, you imagine that you're at the end of that time, in other words, a deadline, and you failed. So it's kind of the opposite of traditional goal setting, which says we succeeded. Imagine what our lives would be like. Imagine what we've done. Imagine what we've done for everybody, how much happier they'll be, how much richer and wealthier we'll be, how there'll be lots of smiles everywhere. This is the exact opposite of that. It says we failed. And then, again, this is all imagining, and you can do this with your team, and then say, what are the things that went wrong? What got in the way that led to that failure? And it could be that you lost a key person. It could be that somebody went on paternity leave. It could be that some regulation changed and it meant that something wasn't possible anymore. It could be some technology improved faster than we thought it would. So you can identify the possible obstacles. And if you're doing this with a team, you know the people who are really good at identifying obstacles. This is their chance to shine, right? Because they're going to tell you all the things that could go wrong. But instead of looking in the future, it's saying, here are all the things that did go wrong, that got in the way of our planning. And then what you do for each of those obstacles is you can do one of two things. You can either say, oh, we didn't think of that, but it's possible, so let's include that into our plan, so it improves the plan. Or we can say, this is something that is going to derail us. So let's make sure that we have a backup plan and another backup plan so we can prepare for it, so we're ready to switch. In fact, somebody for this session that we're running today, somebody sent me a couple of questions beforehand. And one of them is, when you do scenario planning, can you get overwhelmed by doing so many scenarios that you get to the point of diminishing returns? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can. And the way around that is, I think so for most of my clients, 3 plans are enough. You have a plan A, which you're going to follow, and you then build a plan around that and execute it. And then you have a plan B and a plan C. And the key with your plan B, C, and if you decide to do D, E, F, that's fine. The key with those is you know when you're going to switch. And so you see this with the state and territory premiers and chief officers at the moment. They are looking at what's going to happen with COVID-19, what's going to happen. And based on what they're supposedly the best medical advice they're getting is saying, if this happens, then we need to switch. So we need to slam the doors, or we need to ease restrictions. So they should know, and we hope that all our leaders are doing that. You should know when you're going to make the change to your plan B or your plan C. But this process, this pre-mortem process, is a really useful process. If you've never done it before, it stops you being wedded to your first idea, your first plan. Okay, let's see if there's any questions about that, because there's a second opportunity to stop for questions with the pre-mortem process, with being a realistic optimist, or earlier with any of the other things that we looked at with scenario planning. Let me see in the Q&A. Yeah, so Jonathan says that the difference between pre-mortem and risk planning. So yeah, so like one of the key differences is risk planning is looking ahead of the future. The pre-mortem puts you into that future place, and it kind of looks back. And it's worth reading there's a paper in the Harvard Business Review about the pre-mortem process. You can just Google HBR, you need a subscription to it, but you can Google pre-mortem HBR and look at the research and why they said a pre-mortem, where you're looking backwards, is more effective than the forward-looking. And they're similar in terms of the way you do it. It's just that the researchers say that the pre-mortem is more effective. Okay, any other questions coming in? Okay, we'll continue, and I'll give you another choice for another opportunity to ask questions later. I think Christie's lol was from Clive's comment. And actually, that was only to me as well. Okay, so let's look at this being decisive. So in the last 15, 20 minutes we've got together, I want to give you some principles about decision making, because decision making is one of the most useful skills that we can have now to look at the future. Regardless of what plans you've made, we're going to have to make well-informed decisions about our future, for us from a personal point of view and a professional point of view as well. So we're going to do a poll around this, and I'm going to say, what's your decision-making culture like? And I'm going to give you 4 options when we get to the poll in a couple of minutes. And so I'm going to go through those 4 options. And when I say, what's your decision-making culture? It could be you as an individual. It could be you for a team. If you're managing a team, it could be what's the culture of your team. If you're managing a department or an organization, it could be a whole organization's culture. So which of these 4 categories does it fit into? And then we'll go to the poll, and I'll give you the chance to choose which category it fits into. But before we do that, let me show you what the 4 categories are. So the first one are the people who are resistant to making decisions. And I'm sure you know people like that. It's like the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. They're the ones who don't want to make any change. They don't want to make a decision. They're going to be dragged kicking and screaming. But even in that case, somebody else has made the decision for them. I don't think anyone here in this room is like that. Although when I've spoken to some audiences and some groups, they said, yeah, we know people like that. And you may have people in your team who are like that. The second group are the ones who say that a quick decision is a good decision. So they're the ones who are impulsive. They're the ones who go, yeah, drink coffee because we can make decisions faster. And that's sometimes true, that a quick decision is a good decision. But coming back to, remember when I started, we were talking about the Pong thinkers, sometimes that's very much not true, because the decisions that we have learned through our experience and expertise, and we can now just kind of make them instinctively, might not serve us well for the environment that we face now. So there's a risk that you're too impulsive. Then there's the opposite of that. These are the people who are too hesitant. They just never make a decision. Whatever happens, there's always one more piece of research they can do. There's always somebody else they could ask. There's always one more thing they could do, and they never get around to making a decision. So there's two problems with that. One is that opportunity passes them by. And second, when they get too much information, it gets in the way of them making a good decision. So there's a lot of research around choice and decision making, and the paradox of choice is all about that we think more choices is good, but sometimes fewer choices is better. Sheena Iyengar, Dr. Sheena Iyengar has written a great book about this. One of the experiments she did is become famous in social psychology as a jam jar experiment. I'm sure some people here will know it. And what she did was she set up a little kiosk selling jam in a shopping center. And she had two versions of the experiment. One, there were 6 varieties of jam, and the other one, there were 24 varieties of jam. And what she found was when there were 24 varieties, more people stopped, but fewer people bought. Because when they were interested, but when they were faced with 24 options, it was overwhelming. They didn't know which to choose. There were 2 jams that looked very similar. They couldn't make a decision between them. They felt that they might get buyer's remorse if they went home and they bought one and thought, I should have bought the one sitting next to it. So they didn't make a decision. They'd rather say, no, we're not going to decide. So that's the problem with being too hesitant and getting too much information. What we want to do is be the best of both worlds. We want to be decisive. So, and some people are really good at getting enough information. In fact, let me show you this here. So we all want the gold star, right? So we want to say, we're not going to wait too long, but we're going to wait before we act. So we're not impulsive, but also we're not just going to be guessing. We're going to get some data, but not so much data that's going to overwhelm us and waste too much time before we make the decision. So this second poll is what's your decision-making culture? And it's going to be one of those 4 categories. So again, if you want to do the poll, if you've already got the poll window open, you'll see that it's already switched over to the new poll. If you haven't got that poll window open, let me paste it again into the chat room for you. So you can just click in there if you want to. Okay, so it's there again for you. And let's switch over to the poll window. I can see some people have started voting already. Okay, interesting. So we'll leave it open for a bit, just give people the chance to vote. So what's your decision-making culture? And I'll share something interesting that's happened in the last few months that I've noticed with the groups that I've worked with. Okay, good. And actually this group is showing the same sort of pattern. So when I ran this poll, and I used to run lots of groups, this time last year, people tended to be equally between hesitant and impulsive. In fact, there are a lot more people who register as impulsive. But in the last few months, and perhaps this just reflects the uncertainty in our environment, people are more hesitant in making decisions and like hesitant means too hesitant as opposed to decisive. We've got enough information to make a well-informed decision. Okay, yeah, so this is typical, and with most of the groups I'm working with now, when I run this poll, it's a similar sort of results. There are people who are hesitant, but there are also some people who say, no, I'm hesitant, but only to the point that I can make a well-informed decision. And that's good. That's what you want to be. You don't want to be hesitating forever, but you want to be able to make a well-informed decision about the future. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing that. I'll just quickly check. Somebody asked about the decision quadrant again. Let me just quickly show that to you. And that I might have missed the opportunity because you wanted that maybe before doing the poll. But if you want to take a screenshot of it, you're welcome to do that. We are recording this, and you'll get a copy of the recording as well afterwards as well, in case you didn't get that. So I want to show you one tool that will help you with your decision making, regardless of whether you are hesitant or impulsive with your decision making. This is a really useful tool, and I use it a lot. And as I said at the start, somebody is going to get the chance to win a fabulous prize. So this is your opportunity. If you want to win a fabulous prize, which is a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, just in the chat room, type in yes or me or something like that, and the first person will get the chance. Okay, Danielle, is the first person. Daniel Walton is going to have the chance to win this fabulous prize. Daniel, you don't need to turn your microphone on, you don't need to turn camera or anything. I'm not going to do that. So Daniel was the first, so we'll let Daniel go along with this. So as I said, you're going to win the prize, okay? So you're not just going to get it given to you. You've got to do a little bit of work to get it. It's not that difficult though. So let me share for you this little screen here so we can do this. So the way it's going to work is for Daniel only. So can I ask just for everyone else, just hold your fire for this for the moment. I'll give you all the chance to participate soon. So for Daniel, the prize is in one of these three boxes, 1, 2, or 3. So you can see these three boxes here, and I can tell you the prize in one of these three boxes. Which of these three, Daniel, do you think is in 1, 2, or 3? So just like you to type in the chat room. Okay, so Daniel's going for box 3. So let's just mark that so we know that what Daniel's choice is. And by the way, I'm going to give you 2 choices, Daniel, but we're going to do it in a very specific way. So I can tell you before you make your second guess, I can tell you that the prize is not in box 1. So now the second choice I'm going to give you, Daniel, is do you want to switch to box 2 or do you want to stay with box 3? So just type in stay or switch. Okay, now wait to see. Okay, so Daniel's going to stay. So let's ask the audience. Audience, so you've seen that Daniel's made a random choice to start with, and I'm giving him now the choice to stay or switch. What would you do in this situation? Okay, so there's actually, okay, so some people are going to change, stay. 2 is switch, so people are saying 2 is switch. Okay, so some people are going to switch, some people are going to stay. Okay, it looks about 50-50 in terms of the audience, Daniel. So before I reveal where the prize actually is, I'm just going to give you one more chance. Have you been swayed by the audience? So the audience is kind of going 50-50, but there are a lot of people who are saying switch, but what do you reckon? Okay, so Daniel's going up to stay. And it's a good thing that you stay, Daniel, because as a result of that, you do win this fabulous prize, a copy of my book, which I'll make sure I'll send to you. And look, the thing is, I would have sent it to you anyway for playing along. But let's look at the logic behind this and the reason I'm sharing this with you. So the first choice is easy. It's just a random choice. And I think you'll agree that Daniel had a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right to start with. Now, I hope you'll also agree that if Daniel chooses to stay, then his chance of winning is still 1 in 3. I could take boxes away, I could add new empty boxes, I could dance a jig. It doesn't matter what I do. If he chooses to stay, then his chance of winning is 1 in 3. So the only interesting thing to ask ourselves is what happens if he switches. And so let's look at the 3 scenarios. So if Daniel switches, so let's say the prize was in box 1. Okay, it wasn't, but he doesn't know that. If it was in box 1, he's chosen 3, I'd have to eliminate 2, and then switching would win. If the prize was in box 2, then I'd have to eliminate 1, and switching would win. If the prize was in box 3, which it was, then I'd eliminate 1 of the other 2, and then switching would lose. So 1 in 3 times, switching loses. 2 out of 3 times, switching wins. So the strategy of switching is twice as likely to win as the strategy of staying, which is always 1 in 3. You get that? So you're twice as likely to win if you switch. Now this is a famous little puzzle, and it actually is it's a game. It's a TV game show program, which is called the Monty Hall problem. So I've kind of done this really quickly, and I would have given you the prize anyway. And just by the way, so everyone else knows, I'm going to give you all a copy of the book as well. So we'll send it out to you for registering and taking part in this presentation. But the Monty Hall problem is something that Monty Hall was a game show host in the 1950s in the US, and he used to play this game. So every week he'd give somebody, a contestant, the chance to win this, to win a prize. Now he didn't have a fabulous prize like my book. Every week he used to give away a car. So he had these 3 doors, and behind 2 of them were empty, and the other one had a car behind it. Somebody would get the chance to come up and play the game with Monty. He would say, pick a door. They'd pick a door. He'd open an empty door and say, do you want to switch? Now, this was long before social media, but people were still writing into the newspapers saying, no, you should switch. Mathematicians were writing in explaining the logic of why you should switch. And yet, most people in this situation would choose to stay. And there were 3 reasons for it. So one is that they would say, I've made my decision, I'm not going to change. The second reason is they said, actually, it doesn't matter about whether I switch or not. The odds are the same because Monty can always open an empty door, Gihan can always take away an empty box, so it doesn't make a difference. Or the third reason is that, say, I'd really regret it for the rest of my life if I picked the right choice initially and then I switched away from it and I didn't get the chance to win that fabulous book, car. Okay, so most people would stay, but the reason I'm sharing this with you is because a really powerful decision-making tool that what happens is when Monty opens a door, when I take away a box, I've actually changed the environment. And so the decision you make now should be based on the new environment and not based on your original decision. Maybe the decision stays the same, but maybe you need to switch your decision. And many of us have this tendency to do what's, it's called confirmation bias. We think something, and then we find lots of evidence that proves that, that gives us evidence to confirm what we believed before. And we look at any disconfirming evidence, we either ignore it or we reduce its importance, we minimize the impact of it. And now, especially with so much uncertainty, we have to be willing to change. So now, I want to share with you this little tool that will help you to overcome your confirmation bias and to do better decision making. This is really useful for you, whether you classified yourself as hesitant or impulsive, So either whether you take too long to make a decision or you make decisions too quickly. It's a thing called ooching. So ooching is a term from sailing. So if you're a sailor and you're out on the water and there's no wind, it's completely becalmed, then ooching simply means like you don't know what to do. So ooching is just try something, just do a little thing, see what happens. And based on that, then you know what the next step is going to be. So you don't know now, but you do a little step. Now, of course, ooching doesn't sound very professional. It sounds like a thing that you only do for fun. So the professional term for that is build a prototype, or run a pilot project, or do design thinking. So these are all things that are now part of innovation and project management. And this is how we, like the modern way of doing stuff, getting stuff done. So design thinking, for example, which is very popular now in the business world, lots of organizations, the idea is you forget about your products and services, you start thinking about what problem am I solving for my customers and clients, and then you design a solution, but you don't build it. You imagine what the solution could be, and then you build a little prototype or a little test project, a pilot project, and you have a go. You give it out, put it out into the world, and you see what feedback you get. And based on that, you then take the next step. So you ooch. If you've done any sort of lean or agile management, or based on the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, it's the same idea. You create a minimum viable product, and based on that, you put that into the world, you get some feedback, and then you take the next step. So that's this process of ooching, if you like, or it's just building a prototype, doing a pilot project, doing some sort of test to see what the results are, and based on that feedback, take the next step. So it's useful to get feedback from the world. It's also useful for your own learning. As Maya Angelou says, I did then what I knew how to do, and now that I know better, I can do better. And that's exactly what this is about. It's not only knowing what's better in the outside world, but it's also saying every time I do a little test, I learn something for myself. I'm improving myself. And so now I know better, and now I can do better. So do that ooch. So do as much as you can, do experiments, do pilot projects, build prototypes before you do them on a big scale. Okay, so we talked about three things today. So we talked about scanning wider, so that the whole process of scenario planning, it's actually just looking up and looking around rather than just looking down and looking ahead. We talked about this, when you do your plan, to be a realistic optimist and to do the pre-mortem so that you can firm up your plan to incorporate obstacles into it. And we talked about how to act more decisively by doing this ooching process. So just before I finish up, let me just quickly check for other questions and comments. I can see some comments about confirmation bias from Jacqueline. I can see some brilliant. I'll take that as being directed to me, so thank you for that. I can see a whole bunch of the thank yous coming in. I think the thank yous were for the book. So yes, we will send a copy of the book to everybody who's registered when we send the recording as well. Kewaku says the car industry does this a lot, and I wonder whether you're talking about the ooching process there. So it might be. Okay, let me just see if there's any Q&A things. I've got one last thing. Oh, yes, ooching. I've got one last little exercise in the last couple of minutes. Okay, but nothing else in the Q&A. If there's questions, I'm happy to take questions. I'll skip over that last exercise. Duncan, thank you. You're welcome. All right, let me do this last exercise and we'll finish up then. So this last exercise is an exercise again about being decisive. It's actually from a book called Decisive. So Chip and Dan Heath, two brothers who created, what they did is they did research into how to make better decisions. And so the book is all about research-based decision making. And one of the processes that they teach is one that I've adapted, which I think is really valuable for us in these really fast-changing, uncertain times. And it's about taking a broader perspective. The Heath brothers call this give yourself more distance from a decision. And distance doesn't mean I'll sleep on it and I'll be able to make a better decision tomorrow. It's not that. It's saying distance can, in this case, is looking at distance of time. So who knows about the future? Well, you could say, well, a futurist should know. And absolutely, if you need a futurist, I'm around. Please give me a call and we can talk about how to work together. But somebody else who knows about the future is a time traveler. So you can imagine somebody from the future knows about the future. I reckon if you're a time traveler, then 2020 may not be a year that you want to come back to, but leaving that aside, the way this process works is you imagine that where you are now, you think about a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term future. And these numbers might vary. So for this exercise, I'm going to say 10 weeks, 10 months, and 10 years. As I said, I work with a group that said their long-term is 15 years, and your short-term might be shorter than 10 weeks. It might be, we've got a 6-week short-term future. So you can change the numbers, but the idea is to, again, imagine yourself in each of those 3 scenarios in your future. So let's say 10 months from now, imagine your future self, 10 months older, looking back at today and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful for the decisions that you made and the actions that you took 10 months ago that got me and us to where we are now. Okay, and then that future perspective can help guide your first decisions and actions from today. It does 2 things. First of all, it gets you out of where you are now, which might still feel like it's crisis, reactive, don't know really what's going to happen. But imagine what action is going to take you towards the future that you want and that your future you is going to thank you for. And the second thing is it actually does give you some clarity and some perspective so that the actions you're making today are actually going to influence your future. And it might just give you the direction that you're going to take. 2 last things before I finish up. So thank you everyone for coming along and participating. So one for the heart, one for the head. The one for the heart is this, that I think, as I said earlier, we're not all in the same boat, we're all in the same storm, and we're all navigating our own boats through that storm. And I think one of the most useful qualities and most valuable qualities that we can bring out more of now is kindness. So be kind, because as Ian McLaren said in the 19th century, everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, and perhaps you know nothing about it, and it's very difficult to tell just from the surface view, from what's visible on the outside. The second thing is also from the 19th century. Benjamin Brewster said this, and this is more action-oriented. He said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. And I really love that, because I hope you've got some good ideas from today's session. I hope you've written down some notes. I hope you're going to go back and look at the recording and say, oh, that's a good idea. But don't just let them be good ideas that you do nothing with. Please, 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 please take them and put them into action. Ooch with them, because only then will you realize and recognize how to make them work well for you and how to make them work the best for you. So put those ideas into action. Thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for playing. Thank you for taking part in all the activities. I hope you found that useful, not just for yourself, but to see how other people are responding as well. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the future. Thanks everyone. Bye for now.